Almost lost my microphone. Hello. How are you doing? That was lousy. Can we repeat that? How are you doing? All right, perfect. Can we please start with something completely different? Thank you very much for having me here. I think, even though I didn't understand a word today, because I don't speak French, what I saw was absolutely amazing. So I would like all of you to join me in a big round of applause for the people behind the event. And not only the one you see on stage or the volunteers you see. Think about the tech people, percussion people, everyone who made this possible. Please stand up, give a great round of applause for everybody. Well done. Awesome. That's great. All right. Before we start, yes. Who of you know these books? Can you show some hands? Who knows these books? All right. There's some business opportunity here. That's good. So the book on the left, that's This is Service Design Thinking, a book I published in 2010 with my colleague Jacob. The other ones, This Service Design Doing and the Methods book just last year. Besides writing books, I run a software company called More Than Metrics, where we develop software for people who do service design. I'm not going to speak about that. If you're interested, we actually have a booth outside, so just join us there after the talk if you're interested in that. I also run some workshops, and just 6 weeks ago, we did the first This is Service Design Doing workshop here in Paris, in French, which is strange because I don't speak French. But we had other people who handled the French part. I was just there to, I don't know, look good or something like that. There will be another course. If you're interested in that, have a look at our website. We're going to publish the dates in a few weeks. That's all of advertisement I'm going to do. So, 2 things before we start. The first one, we have to talk. If you go on Amazon and you try to buy our latest book, This is Service Design Doing, I just saw something strange. So I just want to make this clear once and for all. Go back, back. My name is Marc Stickdorn. If you go on Amazon and you look up who wrote this book, apparently on Amazon only in France, the author is called Marc Stickdorn. Who the heck is Marc Stickdorn? So I discovered that a few days ago, and then it started bugging me, like, who is that guy? Who is Marc Stickdorn? So I started some research. And I looked it up on LinkedIn, but there is no Marc Stickdorn on LinkedIn. So I said, let's have a look at Google. And Google said, well, maybe you're looking for Marc Stickdorn. I said, no, I'm looking for this guy, Marc Stickdorn. Who is that? So I do something which I really like. I did an image search for Marc Stickdorn. And it turns out he's interested in SQL Server system reporting somehow. Got this book. But when you scroll down, you see more books. Seems like he's trying to switch to a Mac for dummies, which is interesting. He's interested in Windows 10 for seniors. And if you look right on the right bottom, you see he's interested in Windows 10 for seniors for dummies. And interestingly, there's a connection to Steve and his latest book. So I was astonished. And that brings me to my second point. I am not Steve. I'm actually kind of the guy Steve describes, because my slides often have just one visual and 1 to 2 words. And I felt very stupid this morning when I wrote this in bullet points, but that's a different story. I agree a lot with what he said, and there's one thing about focus group this morning that he told. He had this little video about the difference of usability versus focus groups. So in our latest book, we actually have a small chapter about focus group. Basically, it's just a rant about how crap focus groups are. If you ever come to this situation that you have this conversation, I'll give you a little tip. Look up the footnote here. Because in the footnote, there's a quote from a Harvard professor called Saltman. And he wrote an article about how crappy focus groups are. And he did some research on that. What he found is that there's a correlation between the statement of intent, so what people say what they will do in focus groups, and their actual behavior. And that correlation is very low and negative. So people do something completely different than what they say they do in focus groups. I thought that was really, really nice, and it's an argument I often bring when I get this question. All right, enough of that. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. This stands between you and your beer. I'm aware of that. So let's start. What is service design? May I ask you to raise your hands? Who of you knows what service design is? Can you raise your hand? Let's wait for the translation. More hands coming up. All right. Who of you is working currently in service design? Can you raise your hands again? Who is working in service design? So a lot of people know what it is, but just a few work in service design. And I want to challenge you on that. I'm going to ask you the same question again at the end of my talk. So here's my very brief description of what service design is. It is a design process. There are 4 core activities. You've seen that often before. It includes research, ideation, prototyping, and implementation. So let's go through that really quickly. When I talk about research, I talk about both quantitative and qualitative. It's never either or, and often there's a big discussion, oh, only quant counts. No, we need to do qualitative. No, we need both. And both serve a different purpose. So we need quantitative research to monitor certain KPIs over time, but we need qualitative research to get actionable insights, to understand why we see a certain effect. So it's always a question of both, never either or. And behind these 2 fields, there are many different methods. I'm not going to go through all of them. But here's one tip. We often have the problem when we do research that we don't get budget for that. Like research, yeah, you don't get a lot of money, you don't get a lot of time, you don't get a lot of people for that. So how can you get pretty good results with limited budget? There's nothing new, but I'd just like to repeat that. Think about triangulation. That goes back to the 70s of qualitative research. Triangulate different research methods. Use at least 2 or 3 different research methods. Because every research method got their own bias. And only by leveling it out with different methods, you can diminish it. Use different types of data. So don't only collect field notes. Also collect photos, videos, artifacts, sketches. And use different researchers. We often talk about slipping into the shoes of our customers, but we are all wearing our own shoes. And only by taking a look at the same issue from different researchers' perspective, we can level out our individual biases. So what are the methods we use? Of course, quantitative methods like surveys, any kind of data that we can get about our customers, like a conversion analysis, and then qualitative methods like contextual interviews. And very often organizations are good at the quantitative part already, but very often they suck at understanding the value of that stuff. So here's one story. I was working with a manufacturer of those ticket machines. That's why I use that photo. And I started working with them and I asked them, so how do you do your user research? I said, oh, we have a lab. I said, that's great. And do you also go out to customers? No, why? We have a lab. They come to us. It's much easier. So I challenged them. So let's go out and have a look at how people actually use your machines out there in reality. They were a little bit afraid in the beginning. They didn't want to go out. But then I convinced them. We went out. And it took about 20 minutes until we have the following situation. There was a young mother, her daughter in one hand, shopping bags in the other hand, stepping to the machine, entering the data to get her ticket, then with one hand getting out her credit card of the purse, putting it in, punching in the number. When she entered the PIN for her credit card, her daughter ran away. So now the mother had to take a decision. Daughter or credit card? Obviously, it was a credit card. So she ran after her daughter, no worries, no worries. But it's not a situation you want to put a user into it. And this is something you can't simulate in a lab, because you can only simulate situations in a lab that you are aware of. So how do you learn other situations? Only by going out and doing contextual research. Research in the context of a service situation where something is happening. So other methods we use to do that are, for example, the very classic ethnographic approaches. Non-participant or participant observation. There's one missing. Participant and non-participant observation. We also do the same with employees. So employee experience is as important as customer experience. We need to focus much more on that. So in service design project, I also like to look always at what is the experience of the people working here at the different hierarchy levels. And often the first thing I do is taking a look at their workspace and all the little Postits they have around their monitor. Because each of these Postits is a way to hack the system, to make the system work for them. So all of that are opportunities to improve employee experience. We use methods like self-documentation, where people use their smartphones to document their own journey, or autoethnography, which simply means become a customer or employee yourself. And then we collect a lot of data. And from the data we collect, we then try to analyze it, we visualize it. So we do stuff like key insights, user stories, job to be done, visualizations like personas, journey maps, system maps. And they should be always based on data, not on assumptions, on real research data. What we do with that then is we ideate. And you see loads and loads of these pictures. People doing workshops, ideation workshops, crazy things with cardboard and Postits, and I want to challenge that. I think ideation is overrated. That's what consultants sell nowadays when they mean design thinking. It's an ideation workshop with Postits in 55 minutes. That's crap. That's not design. I think ideation is really overrated. Ideas are cheap if you invite the right people to work with you. So it has to do a lot with different aspects. Who do you invite to do research with you? Who do you invite to do the analysis, to create stuff like journey maps together with you? And loads and loads and loads of ideas will appear. But then what is actually underrated is prototyping. And that is actually where we should focus much more. So when we talk about prototyping, every idea in the beginning, every first prototype, is what we like to call a shitty first draft. And don't be afraid of using that term, a shitty first draft. It's an academic term. There are research papers about the shitty first draft. It actually goes back to Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway was once asked, how do you achieve the clarity in your language? And he said, well, I start writing, and the first draft is always shit. That's a quote from Hemingway. You can use that. But then I rewrite, and I rewrite every page up to 100 times, and that's how I achieve the clarity in my language. And in design, we do exactly the same. The first idea, the first draft is always shit, and it's so deliberating for non-designers because they get trained in perfection. And they're afraid of showing you stuff because they think, that's not as good. I can't sketch. It doesn't matter. It's just a shitty first draft. So I might be a bit fanatic on that topic because I think you can't stress out this topic early enough in your life. So this is a photo of my daughter at the age of 4 months. It's a shitty first draft. It's actually not a shitty first draft, right? It's a shitting first draft. That's what she's mainly doing. I think that's really a story we need to put out there. It is so important. So how do we do that? How do we prototype services? Well, we create journey maps, maybe as a first step, just to get a team aligned, to get them on the same page, to know which aspects of the service do we actually need to prototype. But this is not a prototype. This just helps people to understand what we're doing. Prototypes is stuff like that. you're wireframing and you're testing your wireframes with people. You build physical prototypes. This is a photo from a project in Atlanta where we were working on public transport. And you see my colleague is sitting there in a bus stop built out of cardboard in just half an hour. And it's good enough to put this physical prototype out on the street, to test it, to get feedback from passengers, from bus drivers. What kind of information do we need on that? That's where you learn a lot and where actually your ideas develop really quickly. You can also do that in a more high-fidelity way. This is IDEO Germany working with Lufthansa on redesigning the business class experience, where they run entire flights on the ground, just to understand how's the experience and how can we change it. You can quickly change stuff and learn from that. We use methods like desktop walkthroughs, where you walk through a service experience on your desktop and try to learn what works, what doesn't. And of course, you need to prototype the business model through different tools, which also allow you to do that very quickly. So that was the design process. The last bit then is implementation, so you just make it real. And that's the design process. And you hear talks like this over and over and over again. And the last bit, it's easy. You just make it real. That is the hard bit. How do we actually make it real? How do we get it out there? How do we launch it? How do we change it once it got launched? And this is what I'm going to be talking about. So if you read books, guilty of that myself, use this process, it will guide you. So if we look at how people sketch design processes to bring it closer to reality, you probably came across the squiggle from Damien Newman. You have a lot of iterations in the beginning, and at some point, you just make it real. It's easy. So then let's use the same visualization and have a look at our own design process that we went through. So we used the design process of our book, and we used the same approach. And somehow it looked different. This is how our design process looked like. The closer it got to actual launch date, the crazier it got, the more detailed changes you had, the more conflicts you had. So let's talk a little bit about standard processes versus a process standard. We called our process the mayhem. And when we visualized more processes, we saw certain patterns arise, and we gave them names. So let's go through that a little bit. Here's on top the curtain. It might be an agency approach. You don't see anything of the design process until the curtain lifts, and ta-da, there it is. You might be familiar with the maze, where you have loads and loads of dead ends in your design process, and you think you never get out of that. Or I'm still looking for the design process called the Autobahn, right? Where you get on it, and it just works, and at some point you're done and you're there. I've never seen that, but I'm still waiting for that. If you're working in-house, you might be familiar with the black hole. Everything you create, everything you deliver somehow gets sucked into the black hole and disappears. And at some point, in a different time, in a different department, it pops up again, but it has nothing to do with you. If you're working in-house, you're probably very familiar with the last one, the pinball. Getting pinballed between the different stakeholders in your organization, but you never come down to a point, actually. Meanwhile, if we look at what consultants are selling us, trust the process. That's workshop land. So we got workshop land and reality. In workshop land, we see process description like that. That's a 4 to 8 hour service design intro workshop. Or you see stuff like that. That's the blueprint of a 5-day service design sprint. You start with research, you go out, you collect loads of data, you then bring it down, you visualize that, you do your journey maps, personas, you ideate on that, bring it down again. Next day, you start prototyping, you test your prototypes, you iterate on that, and then, day 5, you finally work on the business model, and on Friday, you're done. Is that a design process? Or is that just the beginning of a design process? That's a sprint. That's the start of it. But that's not a whole design process. Nothing got delivered Nothing is out there. Nothing got implemented. So don't trust just one process. There's not just one process. There are parts of processes that you can use and replicate. But for every project, you actually need to design the process itself. And that's nothing new. We all know that for ages. Still, what we see out there is a different story. So how do we do that? How do we design our process? Well, we have a few elements, a few constants that we can use and reuse. The different tools, different methods, maybe standard workshop elements that we can use. Then we have certain constraints: budget, time, money, people, what we're allowed to do. And all that builds the process in the end. And the constants are the different tools and methods you use from the different activities that I just talked about. So as a designer, this means you have total freedom. You can pick your tools and methods from thousands of different tools and methods. From outside, if you work in an organization, if you need to go through this process, does this look like freedom, or does, on the flip side, rather look like anarchy? Well, it doesn't work. So when people are involved, you need more structure than you think. You actually need the structure. You need to guide them. The more freedom they want, the more structure you need. And agencies, consultancies, of course, know that. So let's look at how they sell their structure. What do you see? How do they describe the design processes? There are people who describe it as like, you need these 4 clear steps. That was me 10 years ago. That's crap. You might be familiar with that one. 4 steps not enough. You need diamonds. You need 2 diamonds for that. You look at other agencies and you might see, nah, we need 5 phases for that. 5 is better than 4. Other agencies might say, nah, 5 is not enough. We need 7. It's 7 stages. That is a design process. And if you look lately, it's the circular science circles, where you have growth hacking, design thinking, service design, and the little circles in there, that's agile development. I don't know. Does that really help us? It helps us to sell stuff, but do people really understand what design is through that? Does that help us to bring design into an organization, to lift the maturity of design? What we're actually doing is we have these activities, we select from these activities and build our process out of our toolbox, and then we check it against reality, what we can afford, what we can do. And at some point we call it, that's good enough. A design process is never perfect because it changes while you go. So at some point we say, yeah, that's good enough. So the question is, when is a design process good enough? And how can you bring that into an organization? When we wrote our last book, we didn't write it alone. It wasn't just the 4 authors of us, but we invited the community. We invited 300 people to co-write it with us. And with those 300 people, we came up with what we call the 12 commandments of service design. The 12 commandments. I would like to go through that now, step by step, the different commandments. I'm not going to do that alone, but we invited people from the community, maybe people you know as well, to comment on each of these commandments. The first one is, call it what you like. If you want to bring service design in an organization, maybe don't use the word service design, because service design consists out of 2 words where people think they know exactly what they mean. They hear service and they think, oh, that's how the waiter brings you your coffee. They hear design, they think, oh, design, that's aesthetics, that's my new iPhone, that's how it looks like. And they put those 2 words together and think, I know exactly what service design is. It's aesthetics of how the waiter brings you your coffee. But that's not service design. To me, what service design is, service is what makes 80–90% of our economy. If you follow new strains in marketing, like the service-dominant logic, everything is service. And design is a verb, to design something, to create something. So for me, what service design is, if you put those 2 words together, it's a creation process of what makes the majority of our economy. It's an innovation approach. That is what service design is. But the problem is that people in an organization often don't understand what design is. And that's why maybe don't call it service design, but call it differently. So we asked a friend of ours, Jürgen, to comment on how they call it within their organization.
At Genesis, we even call it SMART, because by putting the customer in the center, by co-creating experiences with the service design toolkit, we found a smart way to make a significant impact, not just for our customers, but also for our employees and on the business results. So if you're looking to make a difference, it's smart to start.
They get around all these buzzwords nowadays. And if I look at some organizations, we see now fights because we got teams doing design thinking, teams doing UX design, teams doing service design, teams doing experience design, and they all do the same stuff, but they all fight for budgets. So maybe just get rid of that. Give it a name which works within your organization. Number 2, no surprise. Make shitty first drafts. We asked someone from an organization who is not exactly famous for shitty first drafts to comment on that. This is Fernando. He's a director at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And they use shitty first drafts, although they don't call it like that.
Shitty first drafts, or lousy first drafts, as we call them in PwC, are an essential component of our strategy to make design thinking implementable inside the organization. And we had a recent example with the learning and development organization where we actually conceptualized a new process for e-learns. And before we decided to just go ahead and implement it as we thought would be the right way, we took a step back and decided to prototype it and review it before taking it live. And we discovered there were a lot of things that could be improved, and that if we would have gone live directly, we probably would have failed.
So how they used to create and start and launch new service was they were just thinking about that, and they launched it. And they corrected it after they've launched, which is really, really expensive. Through some training and a cultural change, they now start prototyping. They can't call it shitty first draft because they're in the US. Shit, it's a word you can't say there, so they call it lousy first draft. That's fine. But the important bit is that they're doing it. They're prototyping, they're testing, and they know that their first idea is probably not the best one. Number 3, as a designer, working in service design, you all are facilitators. And here's why. That's Simon, Professor of Interaction Design in Oslo.
There's 3 reasons for this. 1, you are inherently user-centric or customer experience-centric in your approach. 2, you integrate different viewpoints and different disciplines. Design has always integrated function, production, and aesthetics. Or in design thinking terms, feasibility, viability, desirability. This makes you good in terms of running teams with multiple viewpoints. And 3, you're very good at visualization. By visualizing what's happening in a meeting, different possibilities, and especially what-if situations, as a designer, you bring the team together and you create a shared ownership. So 3 reasons why you should go out as designers and facilitate teams.
Service design is a team sport. There's not the one and only service designer. There's always a team who does it. Some projects you need engineers, and others you need architects, you need product designers, you need UX designers, you need all of that. And it's always a team sport. But you need people who can facilitate a diverse team through a design process. And that's a role of a designer nowadays. Number 4, doing, not talking. So instead of talking about things and thinking about how this could be, just do it and learn from it. This is Clara. Clara works for a German startup that tries to bring electricity to all rural areas of the world. And they had one idea to promote their services and products within the rural areas. And they thought, let's learn from how Tupperware is doing that. Are you familiar with Tupperware and Tupperware parties? Yeah. So they said, let's try and use the same idea there to promote our products there. And this is how it went.
Last year, one of us had the idea to bring the Tupperware party concept to Tanzania. While prototyping the format with existing staff in neighboring communities quickly let us drop it as a sales strategy, we realized that we just found a genius approach to train our own employees. Mobi dinners were organized across the countries and helped them empathize with Mobisoul's customers and their needs.
So it didn't work as a sales strategy at all, but they learned a lot. And they iterated on that. And that's only because they were not talking about and launching it and then they were done. But by doing it, testing it out. Number 5, yes, but and yes, and. We always need both. It's never either or. A design process always has diverging phases, yes, and converging phases, yes, but. This is Belina and her stand on the differences and challenges of yes, but.
So yes, and is a magical thing which helps people in organizations to consider things that they haven't considered before, either putting ideas together or thinking about resources in a different way, in a new way. It gets you to a new place. Yes, but if used well, is actually useful for understanding certain problems that might be in the field, for understanding constraints or certain criteria that need to be considered as part of the problem. But yes, but if done poorly, shuts down conversation. So be careful when you're using yes, but, not to be a dick. Thanks, bye.
I love the ending. Yes, but can be dangerous. If you start with yes, but, it shuts down a conversation before you had time to explore in your idea. So use it wisely when you do it. Number 6, find the right problem before solving it right. Here's Birgit Marge, president of the Service Design Network, why we need to focus on research first.
A very nice colleague of mine, Albert Einstein, is supposed to have said that if he had 1 hour to rescue the world, he would spend 59 minutes on understanding the problem and 1 minute on solving it. And I think that's a really great approach. The better we have understood the problem, the easier it is to find the solution. But I think there is still a challenge for us service designers to better understand how do we get from all the insights that we have gathered in the research to framing the question. And sometimes it seems like a piece of gut feeling and magic. And I think there is a piece of research to be done on how to be better and more structured in translating the insights and the informations into real knowledge and into good questions.
So we need to do more research, and our job often is to stress that out in organization. But who am I talking to? You all know that. Number 7, prototype in the real world. Don't prototype only in your lab. Go out and prototype in the real world. So this is Lauren. Lauren is a quite well-known service designer from Scotland. So be aware that she has a Scottish accent. So pay close attention to that. And she's talking about why it is so important to prototype out there in context, in reality, with your users.
The way that we learn is by doing stuff that might not work. This is how we're taught to design products and services, and we're really great at prototyping. Yet so few of us prototype how we work together. And I believe that if you don't want your ideas to end up on the ash heap of history, if you don't want to kick yourself every time someone else beats you to implementation, and you don't want your revolutionary startup to implode, it's time to prototype how your organisation works together just as fervently as your design process.
So prototype for delivery. See how your organization can cope with it, if there's really ongoing business for them. Need to speed up a little bit. Number 8, don't put all eggs in one basket. Don't use only one prototype, because then you fall in love with this prototype. And you fall into all the biases that are related to that, like a confirmation bias. You only see data confirming your prototype. So use more than one. This is what Stefan got to say to that.
So when we think about design to deliver, it's very tempting to really focus on the one killer idea and put it out there. And I think it's important to try to broaden things a little bit, go in a rhythm and try several things, get feedback, adjust and pulse around to get much more rich feedback and still focus on delivery.
Number 9, it's not about tools, it's about changing reality. That's why we're designing services. This is what Alex has to say to that.
It's not about the tools, it's about the value that you can deliver, that the tools help you to deliver. It's not about the templates, it's not even about the personas, it's certainly not about the blueprints. It's about the reality that you can change in an organization, inside people, inside a movement. It's about that change. That's the important thing. We are change agents. We are not creators of beautiful tools. Other people can do that. That's fine. But what we are about is making a fundamental difference to the way we live, the way we work, the way we play, the way we get better in hospital, all of those things. It's about the outcome, not the output.
Too often I see designers working in service design get focused on how to create a very beautiful journey map. But that's crap. A journey map for us, it's just a tool. When you want to build a house, a tool to build your house is a hammer. The hammer can look like shit as long as it is working to build your house. You want to have a beautiful house, not a beautiful hammer. It's the same in service design. We don't want a beautiful journey map. Because what we have is what we want to have is a beautiful service afterwards. The tool for that is just for a team to work together efficiently. Number 10. Come on. Plan for iteration, then adapt. So don't plan your design process for 1 year, 2 years ahead, and then stick to it, and maybe even do a Gantt chart like I saw that in some organization, like research 2 months, and you're done, then ideation, and so on. Adapt, be flexible. This is Reik talking about how they needed to adapt during a global research project.
Iteration is very important for your project. You have a focus and a rough plan, but you will always find new insights that reframe your problem. For example, we are working on the transition to clean energy. Our initial research pointed to global opportunities, but working with 5 teams in different cities around the world, we iterated to local issues, like waste in Mexico City, or food in Nairobi, or building in New Delhi.
So they needed to adapt. And when they adapted, they changed the entire design process. It was successful in the end. But if they would have stuck to their original plan, they would have failed. Number 11, service design means you constantly switch between different zoom levels. It's like a map in geography where you can zoom in and zoom out. We do the same when we look at service experiences. This is Jamin and his take on that.
Connecting the strategy to the detailed execution across touchpoints is critical for any service designer, which is why being able to zoom in and out and operate at different levels of zoom is extremely important.
In the end, customers assess the entire customer experience, all the tiny steps. So we need to switch between the tiny details and the overall view of that, the overall strategy. The last one, it's all services. No matter if you're working on physical products, on digital products, or on real services, in the end, it's all services. This is Mauricio and his last take on that one.
Yes, it's all service. Some anthropologists even describe human society as a total service system. After all, there's nothing produced by humans that can be assessed without service. Try to access an object without the service of craftsmanship, logistics, marketing, engineering. It's impossible. And this is one of the most exciting aspects of service design. The opportunity to weave a little bit of novelty into the fabric of humanity.
In the end, no matter if you work on a physical product, there are services involved to create it, to sell it, to make it work. You all deliver services. Think about how you design your own services. How do you deliver that to your own clients? Be it within your organization as an in-house team or externally as an agency. Trigger that as a service design project to improve the services you deliver. So let's get to the last point of my talk. How to avoid the bullshit. Excuse my language there. one important thing, and it's so trivial, but I think we need to stress that out over and over and over again. People don't want service design. Old people don't want UX design. They don't care about that. They want their problems solved. That's what they want. So when we talk with clients, they have a different perception. So I told you I like to do image searches. So I did a stock image search for service design. And what do you think? What kind of images do we find if we search for service design online? What do we see? Bullshit, yeah, but what else? Post-its, exactly! Post-its, loads of Post-its. We love Post-its. We see people pointing at Post-its. Like there. Oh, that's a journey map, a user story. People pointing at Post-it. Or even images like that. People moving empty Post-its on a glass window, holding a cup of coffee. And that lady is holding a coffee, having a phone call while you're in a damn workshop. Really engaged. That must be a great experience to work there. So here's a challenge to all of us as a community, because I don't see a big difference between UX or service design. For me, it's the same. Let's change together the visual narrative of how we talk about service design. Let's not talk to our clients about Post-its and stuff like that. Let's talk about what really matters. Let's try to bring back human-centered design into our practice, what we really do, what we really focus on. So I would like to end with a few examples. The first one is mobility experience. Let's have a look at what matters there. Maybe that situation. People informing themselves when they want to buy a new car, if they still want to buy a car. But then also what's behind the scenes, if the car is broken. How to repair that. Focusing on employee experience. How can we make it as easy as possible for employees to work within this organization? Think about the development process of these products. How can we improve that? Let's have a look at hospitality experiences. So of course, when a waiter brings you your coffee, as I did my example, but that's just one part of that. It's people preparing the food. And it's people on the backstage that you don't see, who clean up the rooms in the hotels. What is their experience? How can we make it as pleasurable as possible to work there? How do people clean up after a party? All these are people who are doing some work. The last example, aviation experience. When you're at the airport, how do you get the important information that you need in this moment? It's not to get lost. So I would like to do a little detour. I arrived here on Wednesday at Charles de Gaulle Airport. And I traveled here with my team. My two colleagues arrived at a different terminal. I arrived an hour earlier, so I was sitting there waiting for them, working a bit. And at some point they said, "Hey, we're here, let's go." So I would like to show you our chat that we had. What happened there? So it started like that. "Hey, we're ready. On my way. Which terminal are you? Oh, and which airport? Oh, yeah, arrivals to the Charles de Gaulle. Oh, thank God, it's the same airport. Damn, I'm on my way. At least it's the same airport." I was happy there. Okay, I find them. This is how it went further. All right, same airport. Okay, where are you? Gate, whatever. Okay, and I started my way to Terminal 2. I was at Terminal 1. So I thought Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, that's not a big deal, right? Because they must be next to each other. It's 1 and 2. And only then I learned that between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, there is Terminal 3 in the middle. Of course, it makes sense. And there's parking R and parking X in between. What else? There are thousands of reasons why this happens. Historical reasons, business reasons, management reasons. As a customer in that situation, I don't care. I just say 1 and 2, there's no 3 in between. Turned out it is. Let's go on the aviation experience. It's people and how they experience the flight experience. So we're looking at the entire customer journey from the very beginning to the very end. It's about their experience at the airport in different target groups, different customer groups with different needs. Like this little guy at the airport. And the biggest question, where are his parents? Why is he alone at the airport? It's the people behind the scenes who we don't see as passengers, but who make everything work. It's a gigantic service system. So, no matter how you call it, and I asked you in the beginning, if you're working in service design, I challenge you on that. Because no matter how you call what you're doing, be it UX design, UI, be it different parts of that team, in the end, we are all together designing services and systems. That's what we're doing. Just maybe on different Zoom levels as part. But we all play an important role. I think it's important to understand that as a team sport. Get together, get around the different definitions of how you call what we are doing and work together to really create awesome experiences for customers and employees and citizens. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bon, on a presque fini, donc on va laisser Marc répondre à quelques questions.
Higher, higher.
On a besoin d'un micro en bas, du coup. Katia? Ah bah c'est bon.
Thank you. My question is, in consulting company, we need to imagine tools and methods to estimate the time that we take on the project. And after that, maybe many clients want to see our methodology or our tools, our hammers. My question is, what kind of elements or deliveries do you show in a project if you don't show hammers?
Yeah, I would challenge that. What you described is a very classic client-agency relationship, where the agency does the work for the client, and you only invite the client at certain moment of the design process. For example, you do your research and you share your results after research. Maybe you add one workshop there. And I would challenge that. I think it's much more successful if we really embed ourselves with the client, if we work together with the client. So with embedding, I physically mean embedding, that we don't work in our studio, but we work together with the client in their offices, together with them. And I agree that that doesn't always work, because it depends on the maturity of the client, if they are able to do that. So the question is, how do you get them to do that? So maybe in the beginning, you start with involving them to, well, at least join you on some research. They should see your work. They should do one interview, or at least be present at one interview, at one observation. It makes such a difference if a client sees with their own eyes if a customer is failing, or if they hear it from a customer how shit their experience is. So if you can't bring them to your fieldwork, at least bring one client from one customer from your fieldwork to their office and let them share their story there. Involve them as much as possible in the process, even if it's just little bits. And over time, you will increase the maturity of them. Think about the 12 aspects. Which one can you bring at which point to really embed it, to really make them think about that? So maybe in the beginning, you sell like one delivery at the end of research, something like, we're going to give you 10 key insights. But then you involve them into creating them actually, to seeing that. And maybe you do like one final workshop. But that you start hooking them, and they will get more and more involved in that. In the end, you really want to work embedded with them. Cool. By the way, we have some books as well. You get a book.
Yes, but before we can take another question. Yes?
There's a word that keeps popping in my head since the beginning of the day. I was just here for the conference, sometimes because I find it missing, but in your case, it was really revealing and coming back all the time. The word is storytelling. When you present something, how would you say the skill needs to be very important for a service designer or a UX designer or any kind of design, really? For me, it seems that it looks, and in your presentation, you really show it. When you tell the story well, people really get with you and get in that. And yet, all day, never have I heard that word, storytelling, you know? Listening to you, I make comparison with Ed Catmull's book, Creativity.inc. I don't know if you read it, but whatever. But can you tell a bit more about storytelling and service designing? Do you see a rapprochement as well?
Yeah. So I think it relates closely to what I talked about when I talked about facilitation and how important the role of a facilitator is in the design process and how the role of a designer is changing from someone working alone in an office to becoming the facilitator of a design process, facilitating a team to work together. And most of the time, people in the team are not designers. So how can you convince them? I think storytelling is an important aspect of that. The question is, who should tell the story? I don't think it's us as designers necessarily who need to tell the story. But we need to build a stage for people to tell their stories. And who should tell these stories? It's customers, it's frontline employees. Because we're designing for them, we're designing with them. So we need to build a stage so they can tell and share their stories, because that is really what changes, in the end, the mindset and the culture of an organization. If you're here, what is the impact of your work? So I agree, there is a really important connection. I think we should focus on building the stage for people to tell and share their stories in a way. And maybe we can help them to share their stories through different artifacts that we build together. Was that your answer? Cool. Do you have another question? Or is it B o'clock? Oh, yeah.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Hi. It was great.
Thank you.
So I was wondering about all these 12 commandments, which seems to be just great. But sometimes we have to make face to some constraints like time, budget, skeptical people, protocols, process, hierarchy, whatever you can still name it. So what will be your advice about it? How can we fight with all these things and I don't know, make people understand that we have to go to the field, we have to test with real users, things like this.
Yeah. What often helps is if you don't try to push your own approach. Don't try to push okay, I stick to service design, but you can change it to any word. This is service design, this is a process, these are the tools and methods we need to use. Maybe turn it around, saying, okay, what's in for you? Why should someone in management actually pay attention to that? And think about how is success measured for them. Think about how can you help them to achieve their goals. And if you manage to turn that around and you can offer something that helps them to achieve their goals, then people will start to listen to that. As I said, in an ideal world, you design your ideal process, but that will never work like that because you always have certain constraints, be it budget, be it regulations, and we have to cope with that. A design process will never be perfect. So you can only try to get it as good as possible. And at some moment you will need to call it that's good enough. A tip how to start projects is using a tool called Stakeholder Map, where you map out stakeholders involved in the service from different perspectives. From the perspective of the customer or the user, from the perspective of frontline staff, from the perspective of the organization, management. And you see who are the important people here, who should we talk to, who do we need to bring on our side as early as possible to avoid later on in the project a pitch situation where you pitch your idea against someone. If you are able to involve them as early as possible in the project, and they have a word on that, if they can have a saying to that, you might avoid this pitch situation in the end, and maybe even get them on your side. Cool. I have one more book to give. If there's one more question, there's one up there.
Thank you for the great talk.
Thank you.
My question is more about the first part, the UX research. You had a lot of stickers about listening to the customer, and that it's like a very typical client or stakeholder attitude. They stick to their assumptions and they don't really listen to the users, even if they are in front of their faces. So how can you cope with that?
Yeah. It goes often back to how do we present our data? How do we present our results? In my experience, the worst way you can present research data is if you did qualitative research and you present it in a quantitative way. Like you did 3 interviews and you say 66% of our customers have this opinion. That's crap. People won't believe that, obviously. The same way other round. If you only do quantitative research and then you interpret results into certain effects that you see, it also doesn't work. What works really, really well, in my experience at least, is if people see and hear stuff from customers themselves. If you can't bring them to the users, to the customers, and if you can't bring a customer to a workshop with your managers, at least take a video of people failing in a situation, explaining that. A colleague of mine did a project in a call center. And the call center was in another country, I think it was in Indonesia, and he was working in Australia for an Australian telco. And for a long time, he tried to convince them to start a project on employee experience in the call center, because the call center agents were not able to help their customers because the system didn't allow it. That was the main reason. And because they presented the results just like that, they always said, nah, we're not going to invest in that. And what he did then was he recorded one phone call where a mother was crying because her daughter was somewhere abroad and they stopped her telephone because there was some payment issue. And she said, I can't call my daughter and she's traveling right now and I don't know what's happening. And she was crying. The call center agent was crying and it got really, really emotional. It was just one phone call, N1. And that made it change that the management said, yes, we need to change that. So it goes back to having empathy. How can you create empathy for your users, for your customers? And that's the power of qualitative data. You can back it up with quantitative data. But to convince people, empathy is absolute key. So if you can't bring them, at least take a video and bring them in the room. Cool. That's all the books I have. I just brought 4. I hope that's fine. All right. Do we have...
I think we're done now. So
cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Marc.
you.
Thank you. It was great.
Cool.